Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books out loud while stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 3 and the final part of Little Blue Book number 286, titled When the Puritans Were in Power, written by H.M. Titchener, copyright 1921. So, here we go. The evidence is that their crime consisted of incurring the displeasure of the Puritan preachers. The accusation against George Burroughs, a former preacher, but who had taken up other pursuits, charged that he would pick up a barrel of molasses and walk off with it. As no other person in the community, either lay or divine, could be found stout enough to accomplish such a feat, the conclusion was that Burroughs received his strength from the devil. Both Cotton and Increase Mather testified that Burroughs deserved hanging. Wonders of the Invisible World by Cotton Mather. Another charge made against Burroughs was that he had quit partaking of the Holy Communion. We find the following in the record of his examination. Being asked when he partook of the Lord's Supper, he began, as he said, in full communion at Roxbury. He answered, it was so long since he could not tell. Yet he owned he was at meeting one Sabbath at Boston, part of the day, and the other at Charlestown, part of a Sabbath, I believe it is, part of a Sabbath, when the sacrament happened to at both. Yet he did not partake of either. He denied that his house at Casco was haunted, yet he owned there were toads. What further evidences was needed to prove that Satan had control of George Burroughs? He had quit preaching the Puritan creed. He doubted the saving grace of eating the flesh and drinking the blood of a sacrifice god. He even questioned the existence of toads on his premise as being an indication that Satan was located there. Good God. He killed a man because there were toads on his property. The Reverend George Burroughs had began to think, and thinking is a crime in the sight of ruling religionists, as it is in the sight of ruling exploiters. So the ruling powers of that day sent George Burroughs to the scaffold. Rupert Califf, in a book called More Wonders, says that Burroughs was carried in a cart with the others, condemned to be hanged, through the streets of Salem to execution. When he was upon the ladder, he made a speech for the clearing of his innocency, with such solemn and serious expression as were to the admiration of all present. We are told that many present wanted to stop the execution, but Cotton Mather stepped forth and awed the superstitious people. He told them that Burroughs' innocent appearance, his convincing words, were the deceptions of Satan. The toads in his dooryard proved his guilt, just as the miracles in the Bible proved its inspiration, or it might be an espionage act in the hands of a capitalist class president proves the constitutional blood brought right of free speech to be a felony. We find in the book quoted More Wonders that Mr. Cotton Mather, being mounted upon a horse, addressed himself to the people, partly to declare that he, Burroughs, was no ordained preacher, and partly possessed the people with his guilt, saying that the devil had often been transformed into an angel of light, and this somewhat appeased the people, and the execution went on. When he was cut down, says the record of his execution, he was dragged by the halter to a hole or grave between the rocks, about 2 feet deep, his shirt and breeches being pulled off, and an old pair of trousers of one executed put on his lower parts. He was so put in together with Willard and Carrier that one of his hands and his chin and a foot of another of them were left uncovered. On August 5th, 1692, John Proctor and his wife Elizabeth, residents of Salem, were brought to trial on the charges of being under the control of the devil. Probably some Puritan had observed John Proctor sitting on his porch at midnight, watching Satan transform his wife Elizabeth into a cat. Why not? Did not the author of Revelation see a god with brass feet prowling about with 7 stars in his hand and a 2-edged sword in his mouth? We read that John Bailey, one of the principal witnesses against the Proctors, apparently suffering from an attack of acute indigestion, testified that on the 25th of May, late myself and my wife being bound to Boston on the road, when I came in sight of the house where John Proctor did live, there was a very hard blow struck on my breast, which caused great pain in my stomach and amazement in my head. But did see no person near me, only my wife, on my horse behind me, on the horse. And when I came against said Proctor's house, according to my understanding, I did see John Proctor and his wife at said house. Proctor himself looked out of the window, and his wife did stand just without the door. I told my wife of it, and she did look that way and see nothing but a little maid at the door. Afterwards, about a mile from the aforesaid house, I was taken speechless for some short time. My wife did ask me several questions and desired me, if I could not speak, I should hold up my hand, which I did, and immediately I could speak as well as ever. And when we came to the way where Salem road cometh into Ipswich road, there I received another blow on my breast, which caused me so much pain I could not sit on my horse. And when I did alight off my horse, to my understanding, I saw a woman coming towards us about 16 or 20 pull from us, but did not know who it was. My wife could not see her. When I did get up on my horse again, to my understanding, there stood a cow where I saw the woman. That, so the records state, Proctor and his wife were in jail at Boston when John Bailey, with gripes in his insides and an amazement in his head, rode by the Proctor house and saw John Proctor looking out the window and his wife standing by the door, and finally, after dismounting from his horse on account of the pains, saw a woman who changed into a cow. Only made the affair all the more marvelous. John Proctor was convicted of being bewitched by Satan and was hung. His wife Elizabeth escaped hanging on account of being pregnant. The Puritans could find no inspired injunction regarding the disposition of a witch found in that condition. Therefore, they were in doubt what to do with her, so they gave her the benefit of the doubt, at least for the time being. However, no sooner had Mrs. Proctor been safely delivered of her child than the religious belief of the Puritans again asserted itself, and her execution, early in the year of 1663, was ordered. But she once more escaped the gallows. The evidence is that the clemency shown her was another instance of economic determinism. Her accusers took consideration of the fact that, were she hung, the expense of raising the child would have fallen upon the parish. They had already appropriated all the property of the deceased husband. We read that Elizabeth Proctor escaped by pleading pregnancy some months after the death of her husband. She gave birth to a child. Her home had been desolated. Not only had her husband been hanged, 3 of her children imprisoned, and she herself brought within the very shadow of the gallows, but the officers of the law had stripped that home of all its worldly possessions. With the confiscation of the property of the condemned forming part of the witchcraft proceedings, the craze was not only a religious, but also quite a profitable institution. On August 19th of 1692, a day of wholesale hangings in Salem, Judge Samuel Sewall of Boston, who, together with Nathaniel Saltonstall, Bartholomew Gedney, John Hawthorne, Jonathan Corwin, John Richards, Waite Winthrop, and Peter Sargent, was associate with Chief Justice Stockton, in the which case narrated wrote, "This day George Burroughs, John Willard, John Proctor, Martha Carrier, and George Jacobs were executed at Salem, a innocent Carrier and all. Mr. Mather said they all died of a righteous sentence. Mr. Burroughs, by his speech, prayer, presentation of his innocence, did much more on thinking persons, which occasioned their speaking hardly concerning his being executed. Outside of the 20th century massacre at Ludlow, Colorado, it was one of the most cruel killings recorded in this country. At Ludlow, Elizabeth Proctor would not have escaped with her unborn child. Wyman, in her condition, they were shot to death. That sentence doesn't make sense, but that's the way it's written. There is also recorded of this period that 13 women and 6 men were hanged, and one infirmed old man, Giles Corey, 81 years of age, was pressed to death under a board laden with heavy weights until his tongue protruded from his mouth and his breath was literally crushed out of him. Blue Laws of Connecticut. There are 4 more recorded cases immediately following the hangings of Friday, August 19, 1692. The court convicted as witches and sent to the gallows Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, and Anne Pudiator. These women were hanged on Monday, August 22nd of 1692. The Sabbath was observed between the 2 hangings by solemn contemplations of the carrying out of scriptural commands regarding witches. Also, a considerable amount of money belonging to the condemned was thankfully pocketed by the Puritans of Salem. 2 other women charged with witchcraft, Dorcas Hoare and Mary Bradbury, were tried at the same time with those executed on August 22nd, but were not hanged. Dorcas Hoare was saved from the gallows for the reason that, on the eve of the day appointed for her execution, she confessed to being a witch. She was the first one of whom there is any record of having so confessed. It apparently touched the hearts of the Puritans, or they may have been other influences at work. Judge Samuel Sewall, learning of the confession, wrote regarding the case, "A petition is sent to town in behalf of Dorcas Hoare, who now confesses. Accordingly, an order is sent to the sheriff to forbear her execution, notwithstanding her being in the warrant to die tomorrow. This is the first condemned person who has confessed." Sewall Papers. Upon receipt of this court order, it was decided to leave Dorcas Hoare in jail awaiting further developments. What finally became of her is not known. She escaped from jail, as did a number of others about this time, who were accused of witchcraft. From the history, if the period, it appears probable that certain officials aided in these escapes. It is also possible that some of those who made their escape were penniless, that they had no property to confiscate, not even enough to pay for the rope to hang them. The other woman, Mary Bradbury, who was tried and convicted of witchcraft, but who was not executed, made no confession so far as the records disclose. How she managed to escape from the gallows is not known. One writer suggests that powerful influences were brought to bear to secure her pardon. Perhaps she had well-to-do friends who put up more money for her pardon than co-bear to secure her pardon. Perhaps she had well-to-do friends who put up more money for her pardon. Okay, that's completely repeated again. That could have been obtained by confiscating the Bradbury estate if she had been hanged. There was certainly evidence enough submitted to hang Mary Bradbury. In the first place, she was old and infirm, along toward 80 years. just a time of life according to witchcraft authorities, when the devil delights in transforming old women into some animal, or mount them on the back of a broomstick or gander, and so ride away to a witch's tryst held in the wild recesses of a mountain gorge. In the dead of a stormy night, as the lightning flashed across the dismal darkness, the Puritan, in terror, on his knees, would catch a glimpse of storm-lit skies, rushing clouds and flashing shapes, and conjure phantom forms of witches flying on wings of hell to the crags and chasms where devils held communions. Old Mary Bradbury, in the minds of the Puritans, had doubtless taken time and again such mad midnight rides. One of the evidences of witchcraft brought against this aged woman was the testimony of a feeble-minded youth named James Carr. After telling of visits to the Bradbury home, this witness declared that he was taken after a strange manner, as if living creatures did run about every part of my body, ready to tear me to pieces. With bugs on his body, as well as in his head, the poor fellow was a good witness in a witch case. In this condition, he went on to state, he continued, for about 3/4 of a year, by times, and I applied myself to Dr. Crosby, who gave me a great deal of physic, but could make none work. Though he steeped tobacco in Bosset drink, he could make none to work. Whereupon he told me that he believed I was behagged or bewitched. And I told him I had thought so a good while. And he asked me by whom, and I told him I did not care for speaking, for one was counted on an honest woman. But he urging me, I told him, and he said he believed that Mrs. Bradbury was a great deal worse than good Martin. From this, it would appear that the doctors of medicine among the Puritans were of about the same mental caliber as the doctors of divinity. After hearing the confession of the fatuous James Carr, the fatuous physician consulted a fatuous clergyman, and prayers were added to the tobacco steeped in Bosset drink. The prayers appeared to work where the tobacco prescription failed, for we are told one night something of like a cat came to Carr in bed. He went to strike it off, but could not move hand or foot for a while. It would seem that Jehovah was holding his hands and feet while Satan was operating with the cat. Unable to hit the cat, Carr at last prayed, and his prayer was answered. He did hit it, and since then, psychic had worked on him. Another member of the Carr family, by the name of Richard, testified as follows. About 13 years ago, presently after some difference had happened to be between my honored father, Mr. George Carr, and Mrs. Bradbury, the prisoner at the bar, upon a Sabbath at noon, as we were riding home by the house of Captain Thomas Bradbury, I saw Mrs. Bradbury go into her gate, turn the corner of, and immediately there darted out of her gate a blue boar, and darted at my father's horse legs, which made him stumble. But I saw it no more, and my father said, Boys, what do you see? We both answered, A blue boar. This time Satan had transformed Mrs. Bradbury into a blue boar. Notwithstanding all the evidence, Mrs. Bradbury was not hanged. Powerful influences, we are told, saved her. During the week following the August 22nd hangings, there is found the record of 9 more hangings in Salem. Margaret Scott, Wilmot Reed, Samuel Wardwell, Mary Parker, Abigail Faulkner, Rebecca Eames, Mary Lacey, Ann Foster, and Abigail Hobbs. This partial list of the victims of Puritanism but adds to the millions executed in Europe when the church was supreme. 9 million is the estimate placed on witchcraft executions. 9 million hung and burned because an ancient big medicine man made an imaginary god say, Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. There are records of a number of others convicted and sentenced to be hanged at Salem, But who escaped by confessing that they were under the control of Satan? Governor Hutchinson, in his History of Massachusetts, writes, "Those who were condemned and not executed, I suppose all confessed their guilt. I have seen the confessions of some of them. The swift conviction and execution of those charged with witchcraft and the chance of escape from death upon confession made these confessions become popular. But there is evidence that there were other considerations that made the church element more cautious in their persecutions. So that finally the governor of Massachusetts issued a proclamation to put an end to witchcraft prosecutions. This, it appears, was not done because the Puritans had become, as a class, less religious and more humane, though increasing numbers were constantly leaving the faith, but because the masses began to show signs of revolt against this infamy. They, too, made accusations of witchcraft. But the ones they accused were not old and helpless women and men of doubtless religious convictions, but the very leaders of the church. The outraged people concluded that a law that was good for the goose was good for the gander. As one writing expresses it, they found that the only way to prevent an accusation was to become an accuser. The ruled majority offered the ruling minority a dose of its own medicine. The wives of preachers and leading lights of the church were accused of witchcraft. Satan fought Jehovah with his own weapons. He propounded Bible laws with all the assurance of a devoted believer. The jails became filled with both saints and sinners. In order to escape hanging, both confessed. Of this period we read, "In this stage of things, such a great concession being made to the ranks of the confessing witches, the power of the delusion became irresistibly strengthened. Mr. Dudley Broadstreet, the magistrate of the place, after having committed about 40 persons to jail, concluded he had done enough and declined to arrest any more. The consequence was that he and his wife were carried out upon, and they had to fly for their lives. They accused his brother, John Bradstreet, with having afflicted a dog. Bradstreet escaped by flight. The dog was executed, of course. The number of persons who had publicly confessed that they had entered into a league with Satan and exercised the diabolical powers thus acquired to the injury. Torment and death of innocent parties produced a profound effect upon the public mind. At the same time, the accusers had everywhere increased in number, owing to the inflamed state of imagination universally prevalent, which ascribed all ailments or diseases to the agency of witches, to a mere love of novelty, and a passion for general sympathy, to a desire to be secure against the charge of bewitching others, or to a malicious disposition to wreak vengeance upon enemies. The prison in Salem, Ipswich, Boston, and Cambridge were crowded. Doubtless the disposition to wreak vengeance upon enemies played a large part not only in the earlier witchcraft days but also later, when the people arose in reaction and made accusations against the Puritan ruling class. It is generally conceded by those who have made a study of the history of witchcraft craze when the Puritans were in power that the charge of witchcraft made against Mrs. Hale, wife of Reverend John Hale of Beverly, Massachusetts, one of the most prominent Puritan preachers and associate of Cotton Mather, was the direct and final cause of putting a stop to the arrests, trials, and executions. As Upham states, it was what finally broke the spell. Satan, by having a preacher's wife accused of being under his control, gave Jehovah's laws a knockout blow. Next we have church and state. Poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless torn, how shall your unhoused heads, your unfed sides, your looped and widowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as these? Oh, I have taken too little care of this. Take physic, pomp, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayest shake the superflux to them, and show the heavens more just. Prayer of King Learn. Both church and state are instruments devised by a ruling and exploiting class for the purpose of holding a ruled and exploited class in subjection. Primitive people, knowing nothing regarding her processes, look upon the phenomenons of nature as manifestations of invisible powers, and as these phenomena appear both benevolent and malicious to primitive minds, they become gods and devils. Upon the basis of ancient superstitions, religions were built, with a priesthood that claimed to be in communion with the gods. Growing side by side with this priesthood, a master class arose, first composed of the most powerful and daring of the tribe. The priest and the master became elevated above the masses. They performed no useful task. They formed a slave class to provide their living. The religion of the priest and the characters of his gods were constructed to uphold the master and himself. Faith in this religion and obedience to the commands of the gods became an enduring method to hold the masses in bondage. All institutional religions uphold a master class and a slave class. The Bible enjoins it. The church fights socialism because socialism proposes a society in which are no economic masters or slaves. The rulers and exploiters believe in their religion, but if Jesus himself should appear on earth today and endeavor to institute a religion of equality in the means of life, such as there is much evidence to disclose, he endeavored to institute 1900 years ago, he would be repudiate and at least imprisoned, should his agitation appear dangerous to the rulers and exploiters of their priests. Every ferocious deed imaginable has been resorted to hold the masters and the priests in power. Dungeons and tortures and death have filled religious class-ruled history. To the poverty of the exploited slaves has been added the threat of everlasting torment. They have been led forth to the slaughter at the commands of quarreling masters. Submission to gods and exploiters has desolated mankind. The revolutionary founders of the American Republic well realized the dangers of a powerful church and state. God was left out of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, described the God of the Bible as a being or terrific character, cruel, vindictive, capricious, and unjust. He further said that a people least governed were best governed. Puritanism and despotism were alike despised and repudiated by those who offered their lives and fortunes for liberty. Today, the specter of both these once despised and repudiated harpies has arisen in the land. The Declaration of Independence in the hands of predatory power has become a scrap of paper. Puritanism, cheek by jowl with the exploiters and oppressors, demands a restitution of bigoted blue laws. From espionage acts, gag laws, sumptuary enactments, and censorship, back to the days when the Puritans were in power, is not far to travel. And that is the end of Little Blue Book number 286, titled When the Puritans Were in Power, written by H.M. Titchener. Thanks for listening, and join me in the next Little Blue Book.